Oregon has once again had great success in the transfer portal, but yeah, high school recruiting still matters. Here we go.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view every day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your daily source to stay up to date with the Ducks, which is why, if you have not already, please like, comment, subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to or watch the show, which today is brought to you by our friends over at LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions do apply. Dana Altman's got another commitment. Oregon baseball collapsed. I have many thoughts there, all coming up on today's show. But we start with high school recruiting, which is very much in the news for Oregon football at the moment. Probably the biggest news, seeing as kids are on summer vacation, coaches are out and about, going to camps, having visits, and you see a lot of names being tied to Oregon right now because they're trying to build the best recruiting class that they can. And can they beat last year's class? I don't know. I think it's too early to tell. Like, that's an interesting question to explore as the class unfolds in the coming weeks. But it's really easy to think about. And one of you asked me a question about this that prompted my thought for today's show about how much high school recruiting actually matters. Like, hey, when you've got the transfer portal, do you really need to go out and have these big-time recruiting classes? The answer is yes. The answer is yes. Colorado had the best transfer portal class in all of college football last year, but they didn't have enough of a base built into their roster from high school recruiting success in order to succeed. They went 4-8 and they won one conference game against 3-9 Arizona State. And Oregon, of course, blasted them 42-6 at Autzen Stadium and kind of, shall we say, put some waves in their flow. That wasn't the best metaphor, but you understand what I'm saying. So Zaire Addison is a name that's been around. Michael Terry, they're going after DeCorian Moore, like all big-time names that my everydayers out there are probably familiar with. And they range from offensive tackles to wide receivers and everything in between. But I was thinking about this year's team specifically, which is going to be very transfer-heavy, though not entirely transfer-dependent. And I think that a good team, and this is particularly true in the trenches, as I'll get to, I think a good program in college football is built on high school recruiting still even today, but also uses the transfer portal to make itself even better, to get to that next level. And I think Oregon has struck a really, really good balance of that over the last couple of years. So in 2024, if you just look just at the top line guys, not going into the too deep where the numbers would definitely look a little different. Too deep is not impossible to predict, but again, just looking at the top line starters only on offense and defense, not counting special teams where you have a lot of high school guys that play early in their career. Roderick Pleasant, for example, was a big guy in special teams a year ago. Of the 22 starters that I would think are going to take the field first for Oregon on both sides of the ball on August 31st against Idaho, 15 of them once upon a time were transfers. Now you may say, Spencer, that's a lot. That's a lot. It is a lot. This is a pretty good amount because Oregon's been able to find opportunities to get guys like Derek Harmon or Jamari Caldwell or Jabbar Muhammad or Kobe Savage and make their team better. And some guys are transfers from a season ago, right? So like when I'm calculating that number, Jordan Birch is a transfer because he was. Or Justin Jacobs was a transfer because he was. Tysheem Johnson, et cetera, et cetera. So 15 of 22. 2 points on that. Number one, that still leaves 7 spots, which is a non-zero number, that are going to be starting players, not rotation guys, that come from high school recruiting classes, whether this year's class or previous classes, as is often the case. And number two, if you went into the too deep, that percentage would shift dramatically. And there's a reason that you see reports every year from like 24/7 Sports, for instance, about, well, who has a blue chip ratio high enough to be considered capable of winning the national championship. And Oregon, I believe, falls into that category this year. And they did a season ago as well. And I think this year's roster is better than last year's roster, which is pretty amazing because last year's team was very, very good. And I think this one is capable of being even better because of transfer portal additions they've made. But as you look at all these high school recruits, I think it can be really easy in your mind to kind of project out and say, well, they're not playing this year. They're not even going to play next year. It might be a down the line sort of thing. But this is my, I think, third year or so hosting this show, and I've talked about recruiting a great deal. And a lot of the names that I've talked about, whether on my own or with Brian Smith or anybody else, they're now guys that you talk about this season working themselves into the rotation, right? Think about the defensive line. The top end guys, 3 of the 4 are going to be former transfers, right? Caldwell and Harmon on the interior, Birch at the defensive end, and then at that edge or jack linebacker position, whatever you want to call it, you've got some combination of Mateo, Blake Purchase, Tatum Tuioti, who were, of course, all high school recruits. And then Amarian Winston's in the mix. He was a former high school recruit. And then if you go down the defensive line depth chart, you've got like Keon Ware Hudson. That was a former high school recruit. And someone will pop at the second defensive tackle position. We don't know who that's going to be yet. Let's say it's Mikhail Gardner, for instance. Well, that'd be a former high school recruit. And do you see how this goes? I mean, look at the linebacker position. One guy, former high school recruit in Jeff Bossa, transfer in Justin Jacobs. Everybody else, except for Connor Soley, who I don't think is going to be super high on that depth chart, high school recruits. So I think it's a fair question to ask, like, how much does this stuff still matter? And the answer is a lot, particularly when it comes to depth, because when you go throughout the course of a season, like 15 to 22 starters were one-time transfers for Oregon this year. How many of those guys are going to get hurt and someone else is going to have to step in? I've talked about the safety room a lot. I think the depth there is iffy at best. I mean, it's just not super proven. It's talented. Aaron Flowers, Peyton Woodyard, Tyler Turner, all 4-star safety recruits, but it's not proven. But if Kobe Savage were to go down, who's playing free safety? Maybe it's Solomon Davis, high school recruit. So the roster, the bulk of the roster, even though it's easy to look at the transfers and say, well, they're starting, they're making up most of the spots, you still have to go out there, fill out your recruiting classes. You're not going to see these other big-time programs, Georgia and Alabama and Texas, like anybody else. You're not going to see them slow down on the high school recruiting show. And I think this particularly applies to the trenches. I mentioned the defensive line. 60% of Oregon's starting offensive line this year, high school recruits. 3 out of 5. Marcus Harper, Poncho, Josh Connerly. And the other 2 were transfers. I think in the trenches in particular, that is where the depth really shows up. And you think about another transfer-heavy team, USC, has started to really up their recruiting efforts because over the last couple of seasons, they've brought in a bunch of transfers. And they've had good high-end starters, but they haven't had the depth. They haven't had the success they need on the offensive line or especially on the defensive line. And so Utah has pushed them around for the last couple of years. And there are concerns about USC going into the Big Ten. Now, I think USC is a good team. I'm actually higher on USC than some, shall we say. But I think that Lincoln Riley has realized, okay, I can supplement with transfers, but I've got to build the offensive and defensive lines in particular through the high school classes. And I think that's why in the coming weeks, you're going to see Oregon really go after guys like Zaire Addison or Michael Fasusi or other big name offensive line prospects, the Douglas Utu out of Las Vegas. Guys that obviously aren't going to play in 2024. Might not play as true freshmen, but you got to have them available. If someone goes down, you got to have them to work into the rotation. And you never know when they play as a true freshman. I didn't have Poncho on the 2 deep last year. And he was Oregon's 6th offensive lineman, basically a starter. So that's my take on that. Let me know your thoughts in the YouTube comments. I have many thoughts on, many things, because that's kind of, how this show works is you all choose to tune in for my thoughts, and I very much appreciate that. Did you see what Dana Altman did? I did, and I have many thoughts, not just on Jamari Phillips, but on that guy, Dana Altman. Here's a thought on LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality candidates that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just a job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals that you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't even visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're hiring in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. Over 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring for good reason. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. So Dana Altman has got his latest addition to the 2024-25 Oregon basketball roster. We'll get to that. Let's start with Jamari Phillips, because that's the guy's name. 6'3", 190-pound shooting guard from Glendale, Arizona. Because, I thought Oregon was done adding shooting guards when Raheem Moss came over from Toledo. They've added 2 more since then. I think there's a part of Dana Altman. This is not the thought I was alluding to earlier. I think there's a part of Dana Altman that wants to be utterly prepared for the wave of injuries that keep hitting his program year after year after year. He's ready. He's got a lot of guards and wings on this roster. I mean a lot. Phillips is a top 50, 55 player, depending on where you look in the 2024 cycle. So he'll be an incoming true freshman. He was committed to Arizona. And the scouting report on him, according to Adam Finkelstein of 24/7 Sports, said, quote, Jamari Phillips is one of the more naturally talented and versatile guards in the class. Dana Altman loves versatility. He's a tough shot maker who can make threes and pull-ups in bunches when he gets hot. He's built up his body to become a legitimate power guard. He's also capable of asserting himself on the defensive end of the floor, end quote. 6'3", 190 is not the bulkiest of individuals. I can tell that, in going from watching his sophomore year highlights to his junior and senior year highlights, he's definitely made himself bigger. I think he could still add another 10 to 15 pounds if he wants to, depending on the type of player that Oregon wants him to be. He's, I'd say, solidly athletic, not overly athletic. Kind of reminds me of Jordan Bell a little bit. Like, the athleticism is there. You see it, but it's not Kenny Wooten jumping off the page or the screen, I guess, because we're watching these guys on TV. But a couple of thoughts. He was committed to Arizona, and he'd signed with them. He got out of his national letter of intent because Arizona was able to get Caleb Love to return to the Wildcats as they go into the Big 12. And Caleb Love, as Oregon fans should know, is a really, really good basketball player. He lit up Oregon for over 30 in both regular season meetings, which were both wins, but then Oregon won when it counted in the Pac-12 tournament, made the run to the NCAA tournament. That was all fantastically great. When Caleb Love decided to return, Jamari Phillips requested to be released from his national letter of intent, which he had signed back in November, and then committed to Oregon. So the reason I bring that up is that's a curious sequence of events. To come to a guard-loaded, wing-loaded team as a guard/wing when you decide not to go to the previous school you were committed to because you're worried about playing time, it's odd. It's odd because if you were to go through every roster in the Big Ten, I'd have to imagine, and he had offers from several other schools, I have to imagine there are other places that weren't already looking 3 deep at the 2-guard position. Because I don't know where he slots in the depth chart. I really don't. Because the Caleb Love returning that makes him decommit factor makes me think he's expecting to play as a true freshman. But where are his minutes coming from? There is no way. I think Phillips is a talented player. He's a talented player. I'll get to my comparison for him in just a moment. I do not see him coming in and being a starter over TJ Bamba at the shooting guard position. Certainly not. And Raheem Moss came in from Toledo. Phillips hasn't played a single minute of college basketball, and Moss has. And he's been very good. First team All-MAC, and that guy can bring it at both ends of the floor. I don't know. I don't know. It could be a philosophical change for Dana Altman that he's trying to play smaller, kind of a 4-out, 1 big sort of look. And so to do that, you need a bunch of athletic and decently sized guards especially to complement Shellstat. I mean, Shellstat's tiny. Like, he gets beat a little bit defensively. He's also super active because he's just lightning quick, but he's not the greatest defender in the world. And maybe Phillips is a guy they see as, being able to get out there on the court and, help out a little bit at that end. He's just 6'3", but, Kuznar was 6'4", and Kuznar was a big defensive presence. But remember, they also brought in Des Lindsey from the JUCO ranks. Dana loves his JUCO guys. So you've got 4 shooting guards, essentially, now. That's a lot. That's a lot. And by the way, Keyshawn Barthelemy is probably your backup point guard, but he can come in and play the shooting guard as well if you wanted to have a really small backcourt. I mean, that would be the smallest lineup Oregon could put on the floor, would have those 2 guys in it. Barthelmy's 5'11", Shellstad's, I think he's listed at 6 foot. That's generous. Like, neither one of those guys is very big when you put them on a college basketball floor. So, I think getting more talent, there's no bad thing, right? I mean, the comparison football-wise would be Oregon secondary. Did they need to bring in Cam Alexander from UTSA? No. But he's an All-American Conference caliber corner. If you can bring him in, yeah, it's fantastic. Like, you got a guy who could start on a number of other teams as a rotation player. Okay, that's great. That's last time I checked what all the great teams have. I mean, look at Gonzaga for basketball, just as a great example of how they have guys that sit on their bench that become stars in like 2 to 3 years. Or Umar Ballo at Gonzaga, wasn't doing anything, wasn't playing a lot, goes to Arizona with Tommy Lloyd as assistant, boom, all-conference player immediately. So I'm curious about that. My comp for him when I watch his highlight reel is Tyler Dorsey. 3-level scorer, solid athleticism, really easy, clean shooting motion. And like, that's just kind of who he reminded me of from an Oregon standpoint. Now, he's a little bit shorter than Dorsey was, who was 6'5", and Phillips is 6'3". Oregon had the scholarship room, though, and then they could still get N'Faly Dante back. We don't know. I don't know what the NCAA is doing. No one ever knows what the NCAA is doing. But I wasn't expecting the move. I talked about it last week. Oregon had him on campus for an official visit, and then he committed. And I said, okay, adding another body in there. Maybe this is just a small ball approach. Maybe they're only ever going to play a center on the court when it's Nate Biddle, and they feel like KJ Evans can play the 5 a good amount. And if Dante comes back, then they just kind of rotate those 3 and play matchups. I don't know. I think there are a lot of different ways they could go. The second thought I have on this is, remember when Dana Altman was getting calls from Oregon fans to retire? That was a good one. Now, okay, like, to be fair, if you were someone, and I'm not going to, call you out publicly or anything, but if you're someone who felt that way, I understand. It was a thought that I had. But then as the season went on, before they made the NCAA tournament, I was leaning towards, and ultimately like 90% committed on, yeah, I think they should keep him. I think he can still do it. He can still do this. This was not a guy who had this is a borderline 5-star recruit. His composite rating on 24/7 is like 98.4 or somewhere in that range. It is very high. Arizona, big time program. Tommy Lloyd, you say whatever you want about their postseason success. Arizona basketball is big time. They're in the Big 12. That's the best basketball conference in the country. He was going to play there, and he's going to come play at Oregon instead. So Dana Altman this offseason, man, has just, I don't know how personal it feels to him. I'm just saying he has the right for it to feel that way, because he faced questions about it. It wasn't just internet people commenting or sending angry messages to me or the Odds and Audibles podcast or wherever. No, there were people asking him questions at media availabilities in which, he was having to talk about the prospect of retiring. Would he move on? Would he stay at Oregon? Can he still do it? Yeah, he can still do this. He can still do this. He's still respected. He can still coach. He can still recruit. He's showcased all that. So just another weapon in the tool bag, and we'll see how much Phillips plays. We'll see how much he plays. I don't know if there's a lot of playing time available for him, but certainly Dana Altman just continues to make me just chuckle. Like, that guy's like 70 years old, still getting it done. not getting it done, Oregon baseball. Oh boy. Oh boy. I have so many thoughts. I have so many thoughts, and I'm going to share them next. I have good thoughts to share first. They're about FanDuel. Summertime means baseball, the NBA Finals, and a lot more. And you can bet it all on FanDuel. It's all available over there. Oregon stuff is available to bet. Win total, Big Ten title odds, national title odds, make the playoff, miss the playoff, everything you want. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 you can use to bet on everything from Finals MVP, Peyton Pritchard, to who's going to hit one out of the park. No, Peyton Pritchard will not win Finals MVP. But if you wanted to bet it, you could. You could. Everything's over there at FanDuel. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Add a big win to your summer bucket list. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook and our official sportsbook sponsor here at the Locked On Network. A disaster, an epic collapse, all-time bad. So I'm going to start off on a positive note. Oregon baseball, don't lose sight of the fact. This is a great season with a horrible ending. Oregon baseball got to the Super Regional for the second year in a row. That's never been done before. I think Mark Wasikowski has done a fantastic job with this program. I think he did something incomprehensibly bad from a game management standpoint on Sunday night in College Station. For those who missed the game, allow me to read the sequence. This was just the 7th inning went awry, shall we say. Oregon led 8-4 on the precipice of forcing a Game 3. Texas A&M was physically starting to fall apart. They had a reliever get hurt. Their best hitter got hurt, and Oregon still gave up double-digit runs. They gave up 13 runs a game in 2 matchups here. And I thought Texas A&M was a much better offense than anything Oregon had faced in the regionals. Should not have gone like this. Here's the 7th inning. Goodness, I cannot believe that this is a real sequence of events. So, it starts off with a lead. Oregon has an 8-4 lead. It starts off with a walk. Kent singles to right. Camarillo to third. Okay, first and third, nobody out. Not good. Give up 1, get out of the inning, 8-5, still good. Chestnut struck out looking. Great. Huge. Double play, get out of the inning. This could be good. Appel walked. Okay, so that's 2 walks. Keep track of that. LaViolette walked. That scored the first run. That's 3 walks in the inning. Gravovac struck out looking. Now there are 2 outs in the inning. Maybe he's going to work his way out of it. Schott walked. That's 2 runs that have scored on 1 hit. Burton hit by pitch. Sorrell walked. Those both scored runs, tied the game. Then Jordan comes in relief, walks the first guy. 9-8. Again, 1 hit to bat through the lineup and then some and score 5 runs. And then there was a grand slam and then the game was over. Oregon loses 15-9. So, tragically, Oregon's season is over. Great season, horrible ending. When I think about all-time Oregon sports collapses, this to me is 3rd. Number 1. Oregon State 2022. Rival, big lead. You had a 3-possession lead in the 4th quarter against your rival. That's the worst. That is the worst collapse. I'm not saying worst overall loss. I'm saying worst blown lead. 2nd, you all know where I'm going with this one. TCU 2015 Alamo Bowl. 31-0 at the half. Still feels weird to say out loud. And now 3rd is the 7th inning of Game 2 of the Super Regionals for Oregon Baseball 2024. It was that bad. And so Mark Wasikowski, again, is a good coach. I am not on this show calling for his job. I am coming on here saying he made a mistake. He made a bad mistake. He left Brock Moore out there after he had already walked multiple, but he walked the bases loaded. He walked in a run. Then he struck a guy out. You could debate whether he should have been there to try and strike that guy out in the first place, but he did. So then he got the second out. But that batter needed to be the last one that he could have faced. Because he was either going to reach or you were going to get out of the inning. When it was 8-6, like Oregon suffered some injuries in the bullpen. Michael Friend got hurt coming down the stretch of the season, or maybe he might have been available. But somebody, you can't leave a guy out there. He had completely lost it. He hadn't just lost it. Like once he walked in the second run, you got to go, nope, done. That was his fourth walk of the inning. He went on to walk two more and hit a batter. Like there were 7 walks issued in the inning. 7 walks. Oh, I got a message from somebody that said, I haven't seen that even since a Little League game. I got to tell you, I was a Little League pitcher my entire Little League career. I didn't walk people like that. Just get up there and throw some freaking strikes. If they hit it, yeah, it's frustrating. Yeah, you got to be able to throw quality strikes. It's especially frustrating for me. Everydayers know this. I'm a big Seattle Mariners fan. The Mariners have the best pitching staff in all of baseball. Their bullpen's always good. Their starting pitching is elite. They're fantastic. Their fundamental philosophy is to throw strikes and don't walk guys. So that's what I'm accustomed to as a baseball fan. And then that just absolute fiasco. I mean, Grinsell was walking guys. RJ Gordon had no command yesterday. Look, college baseball is crazy. It's not played at the same level as Major League Baseball, obviously. I think there's a pretty sizable gap there, even more so than some other college to pro sports, particularly in the pitching department. Oregon in the first game had a 6-3 lead. Oregon in the second game had a 7-2 lead. To lose both of those games, absolutely brutal. Absolutely brutal. Brock Moore cruised through the first 2 innings. Cruised. He came in, Grinsell was okay. He battled, but he didn't have great command either. A wild pitch led to a run in that game. That was the other thing that kind of got overlooked because the 7th inning was such an abomination of a baseball inning from a pitching standpoint. Like, just throw a strike. I mean, the Texas A&M batters were traffic cones up there. 2 hits. 2 hits led to a 9-run inning. I've never seen anything like that before. 7 walks and a hit batter. I'm pretty sure those were the final numbers. It might have been more. It might have been. It was horrible. It was absolutely horrible. They just completely fell apart. And Brock Moore has thrown multiple innings of relief previously this year. He came out for the 5th, cooking. 6th, money. He threw 16 pitches in those innings. Pretty sure that was the number. It was like 16 pitches. He was cruising. Of course you send him back out there for the 7th. It's just like Logan Mercado in the regionals in the first game against San Diego. You just kept pitching well. You kept him out there. Of course you should. But then at some point, you need to have a succession plan. Brock Moore wasn't going to throw innings 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. You got to have somebody in mind. You got to have somebody loose. And there was just nobody in the bullpen until there had been 4 walks in an inning and multiple runs had come around to score. And then there wasn't a change until the game was tied. That was horribly managed. It was horribly managed. And it was, unfortunately, reminiscent of that Alamo Bowl. I mean, Oregon couldn't snap the ball. And Oregon couldn't throw strikes on Sunday. So, a really disappointing end in all-time Oregon collapse. I don't know how else to see it. I cannot think of other Oregon athletics events in which they have blown leads that were that bad. I'd say football in 2022 is the worst, the one that stings the most. And by the way, some people might mention, what about the Washington games? They didn't have massive leads in those games. They should have been able to win one of those three, but they didn't. But they were never up by 20 points. They weren't up 4 runs with 3 innings to go, and then they just let Texas A&M walk their way to a victory. That was really disappointing. It was disappointing, and the pitching that was so good in the regionals just fell apart. They just lost their command. Gordon and Grinsell. I didn't think they were going to be the same. I didn't think they were going to be as dominant. Didn't expect them to, but that was really, really discouraging. And it's, again, a really frustrating end to an outstanding season. They went 3-0 in the Santa Barbara Regional. They weren't supposed to come out of there, but they did. And I think this program's in a great place. It's really clear where they need to improve. They got to have a deeper lineup of bullpen arms. Because if you're Mark Wasikowski, goodness, I hope he thought about making a move at some point. But you have to imagine one of the reasons he didn't is he didn't feel good about the next arm coming in, who in his defense went walk, grand slam. So maybe there just weren't any rested arms out there. Clearly the depth was not good enough. Like I was saying at the beginning of this show for football, you got to have depth. And Oregon did not have the depth of arms in the bullpen. I was watching the Oregon State game. They had guys with sub-4 ERAs just cycling through. They were playing Kentucky on the road. They lost the game 3-2. So that's where they have to get better. But the bats came alive. That was great to see. And it was a really fun season, just with a horrible ending. Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and go Ducks.